Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the news desk, as we'll call it, for the final installments of Biology in the Basement with your host, Mr. Andraco. The iMac is on the fritz, so we get to have this up close and personal version since I've got to use my Chromebook to walk you through your slideshows. So bear with me, and don't worry, I'll include these slideshows along with all of these videos on Google Classroom. So, anyways, let's get started with a fact of the day before we review the basics of biology. And this one's a good one. As you just finished your homework, hopefully, on biodiversity. And if you remember our lab on relationships in biodiversity, that state lab, relationships in biodiversity. And one of the reasons why we wanted to maintain biodiversity is so we could find some kind of cure for a disease someday. Well, scientists have identified specific compounds from the Brazilian pepper tree. It's a weedy, invasive shrub in Florida, but it disarms antibiotic resistant staph bacteria. So here we go. Here's some weed that grows, this weedy shrub that grows in Florida that's invasive from Brazil. A big problem, but turns out it could seriously help us with some of these antibiotic resistant bacteria out there. So that's why we want to maintain biodiversity on the global level. So let us begin with biology, the basics. This is like your day one lecture. This one will be the shortest one of all your lectures. We're just going to go unit by unit through the last few days of school. And I've got a short little video or presentation here to share with you that you can just remember some of the keywords and terms and processes and things that we have learned this year. So let me get right to it. Right? What is biology? Right? Ology, study of, bio, life. Right? We study living things. And that's simply what it is. We learned the fancy term for a living thing, that is an organism. When we say living organisms or organisms, just general, that is a living thing. It's just a fancy word for it. And the basic unit of life is a cell. So those were the first real terms that we learned that first day of school. Where things that are living are called organisms. Biologists are the ones who study them, and living things are made up of at least one cell. We learned we are made up of approximately 75 trillion cells, but you could exist as just one old cell. So we looked at some terms related to living things at the beginning of the year to help you understand what we were going to talk about when we got to this point. And I'm sure you understand all these terms by now, right? Metabolism, the sum of all the chemical reactions that take place in a system. Homeostasis, keeping that internal balance, keeping your cells happy despite what's happening in the external environment. We've got good old regulation, which is the process of maintaining homeostasis, when you're not at homeostasis, you must regulate. It can come in many forms. Usually you are notified through a stimulus. There is some stimuli letting you know that something is wrong, and your body will respond to it to maintain homeostasis. Evolution was a term that we had to be introduced at the beginning of the year because it was kind of a theme that ran underneath the whole year, just knowing that species change over time. So when we were talking about cells or ecology or whatever, understanding evolution was at the core of all of that. And I wish I had more time to put all those pieces together here at the end of the year. And the last one is DNA. can't talk about living things without talking about DNA, because it is the blueprint that is inside of all living things. We all share one thing, whether we are the smallest cell or a complex human being, and that is that we take our directions from the code in our DNA. Segue to characteristics of all living things. All living things have DNA. They're all made up of cells. They all respond to stimuli. They grow and develop. They take in energy and use materials. They respond to stimuli. They evolve as a species, right? And we had that, probably was the first question of your first quiz, were just these 8 characteristics of living things. And then right at the end, we talked about them again when we got to the virus, where we said, well, is a virus a living thing? And we said, in the eyes of science, no, it's not, because it doesn't have all these 8 characteristics of living things, but as you can tell, we know of its presence. So that wraps up the first day of school, first lecture, first unit, first everything, kicking off what is biology, what is a living thing called an organism, what do they do, and what makes a living thing. So that was your day 1 lecture, your unit 1 lecture, and from here on out, you'll learn about everything from here on. Next, we'll be talking about one of your favorite topics, that is biochemistry. We'll see you later.